Welcome to Monk's Temple. Tonight, let's begin with an image. Imagine a person standing before a vast, intricate lock, the lock to a door behind which lies a profound and lasting peace. In one hand, they hold a meticulously detailed manual explaining the lock's history, its metallurgy, and the theoretical principles of its mechanism. In the other hand, they hold a simple, worn set of lockpicks, learned through patient, tactile practice. Which one opens the lock? The manual alone is just a fascinating book. The picks alone, without understanding, might scratch at the mechanism but never truly engage it. The lock, of course, is the nature of your own mind and the end of suffering. The manual is the profound learning of the Buddhist teachings. The lockpicks are the consistent, devoted practice of meditation. This is the gentle, essential tension we explore. Not whether to learn or to practice, but how to let one hand inform the other until the lock clicks open. The Buddha's path is often described as a middle way, and this balance between wisdom, panna, and concentration, samadhi, is its very heartbeat. To lean entirely into intellectual learning is to study the map of a forest so intently that you never feel the moss underfoot or hear the birdsong. To leap into practice without guidance is to rush into that same forest without a map, potentially wandering in circles, mistaking every clearing for the destination. The core concept we must hold is that the Dharma is both a teaching to be understood and a reality to be realized. One illuminates the other. Let me share an original story. There was a renowned chef, Elena, who dedicated her life to mastering the cuisine of a particular region. She read every historical text, knew the chemical properties of every spice, and could recite family recipes going back centuries. Her knowledge was encyclopedic. Yet, when she cooked, her dishes, while technically correct, were often described as lacking soul, too perfect, or academic. Puzzled and frustrated, she traveled to the region's remote villages. There, she cooked alongside grandmothers who measured nothing, who tasted and adjusted by instinct, who spoke of the feeling in the hands when the dough was right. They didn't know the chemistry of fermentation, but they knew its life. Elena's vast learning finally had a context. She began to practice not just to execute, but to feel. Her next dishes were transformative. The learning gave her depth and authenticity, the intuitive practice gave them heart. She had fused the map with the journey. This illustrates the first subtle danger of leaning only on learning in Buddhism, the creation of a conceptual refuge. We can build a magnificent library of Buddhist philosophy in our minds. We can understand dependent origination, emptiness, and the stages of enlightenment as intellectual concepts. This feels safe, impressive, and clean. But if this knowledge is not applied through practice, it becomes a refuge from our raw, unmediated experience rather than a tool for understanding it. We use the words impermanence or non-self to label our experience from a safe distance, never allowing those truths to dismantle our deepest clinging. The practice of meditation is what brings those concepts from the library into the living room of your direct awareness. It's where anger stops being a Buddhist term and becomes a felt heat in the chest, observed with curiosity, seen as impersonal and passing. If this approach of marrying understanding with direct experience speaks to you, consider subscribing to Monk's Temple. It is here we cultivate this balanced practice together, supporting each other in turning wisdom into lived freedom. Now, consider the opposite path through another story. A man named Leo found meditation during a personal crisis. The stillness was a revelation. He practiced with fervor, valuing only direct experience and dismissing book knowledge as empty theory. He became very still, very calm. But over time, this calm became a wall. When difficult emotions or life challenges arose, his only tool was to retreat into that stillness, to numb out. He had no framework to understand his experience. Was the deep peace he felt a glimpse of nirvana, or was it a subtle form of suppression? When a dark period of doubt arose, he had no teachings to reassure him that doubt itself is a known hindrance on the path. He was lost in a beautiful but featureless plain of quiet, with no compass. His practice, devoid of the guiding light of the Dharma, had become an end in itself, a comfortable dead end. This is the risk of practice without learning, the misinterpretation of the landscape. The Buddha, in his profound compassion, left detailed guides to the mind's terrain. He described common pitfalls, the 5 hindrances, false summits, the meditative absorptions, and the true landmarks of freedom, the factors of enlightenment. Without studying these guides, a sincere meditator can spend years, even decades, diligently practicing but heading in the wrong direction, or staying stuck in a pleasant cul-de-sac. Learning provides the context that turns raw experience into insight. It helps you recognize that the luminous light you see in deep concentration is a sign of collected mind, not the goal. It tells you that the terrifying sense of dissolution is not madness, but a direct encounter with the truth of anatta, not self. An ancient discourse highlights the tragedy of this split. It tells of monks who divided into factions, the scholars and the meditators. Each group believed their approach was superior, each looking down on the other. The Venerable Maha Chunda pointed out that this very division was a failure. A community that fractures the Dharma into competing camps has lost sight of the teaching's unified purpose, the end of suffering for all. The scholar who cannot appreciate the value of direct experience is like a person who memorizes a recipe but has no idea what nourishment feels like. The meditator who scorns study is like a person trying to nourish themselves by blindly eating anything they find, without knowledge of what is food and what is poison. Both are essential to the wholesome meal. The psychological insight here is powerful. We all possess 2 primary modes of knowing, the narrative mind, which learns, analyzes, and constructs stories, and the experiential mind, which feels, senses, and exists in the present moment. Trauma therapy, for instance, has learned that healing requires not just talking about a past event, narrative/learning, but also safely re-experiencing and processing the associated bodily sensations, experiential/practice. Buddhism, in its timeless wisdom, has always prescribed this dual approach. The narrative mind learns the Dharma to create a framework of sanity and hope. The experiential mind, through meditation, does the actual work of processing the raw data of life within that safe framework. One mode without the other is incomplete healing. Let's imagine you wish to master a musical instrument, a violin. You could spend years studying the physics of sound, the history of Baroque music, the biographies of great composers, and the precise mathematical ratios of perfect intervals. This is the path of learning. You would know about music with immense depth. Yet, if you never pick up the violin, never feel the resistance of the strings under your fingers, never endure the screeching of wrong notes as your muscles learn their own intelligence, you will never know music itself. The vibration in your chest, the flow of phrase from intention to sound, will remain a theory. Conversely, you could pick up the violin and saw away with pure instinct, mimicking tunes by ear without understanding scales, theory, or form. You might produce pleasant sounds, even move people, but your progress will hit a ceiling, built on accident rather than understanding. Mastery, the kind that allows for true expression and freedom, requires both the deep knowledge of theory and the raw, repetitive, embodied practice. Your mind, in the pursuit of peace and wisdom, is that instrument. The sutras and teachings are the rich theory of music. Meditation is the daily, often awkward, practice of playing. This brings us to a core Buddhist principle viewed through a psychological lens: top-down and bottom-up processing. Top-down processing is when your existing knowledge, beliefs, and expectations shape your perception of reality. In our context, this is the learning, the framework of the Four Noble Truths, the map of the Noble Eightfold Path. It shapes how you interpret your experiences. When you feel anxiety, the learning might say, "This is dukkha, the first truth. It has an origin." This is a top-down insight that provides immense relief and direction. Bottom-up processing is the raw, sensory data coming in, the direct, unfiltered experience of that anxiety as a tightening in the throat, a racing heart, a flurry of mental images. This is the domain of pure meditation, of mindfulness, sati, where you meet the sensation before the story. Healing and transformation occur when these two streams meet. The learning, top-down, provides a container of meaning and safety. The practice, bottom-up, provides the authentic, lived material to be held within it. Without the container, the raw experience can be overwhelming, confusing, meaningless. Without the raw experience, the container remains empty, a beautiful but unused vase. Consider an original story. A man named Arthur was a brilliant legal scholar, an expert in constitutional theory. He could debate the nuances of justice for hours. However, in his personal life, he was perpetually embroiled in bitter conflicts with neighbors, family, and colleagues. He felt constantly wronged. His theoretical understanding of fairness and ethics was impeccable, yet he could not practice it in the heat of his own emotions. His learning was entirely top-down, disconnected from the bottom-up reality of his own reactive mind. He decided, skeptically, to try mindfulness. In his first few sessions, when a feeling of righteous indignation arose, instead of launching into a mental legal brief, he was instructed to simply feel the physical sensation. He discovered a hot, hard knot in his stomach. The practice of staying with that knot, the bottom-up processing, slowly loosened the automatic top-down story of, "I am right, they are wrong." For the first time, his learning about justice had a chance to inform his actions from a place of clarity, not reaction. The practice created a gap, and the learning could finally flow into that gap. This is the peril of an intellect-heavy approach, the fortress of concepts. We can use our learning to build an impregnable fortress of right view. We are safe inside, hurling well-reasoned arguments against the barbarians of confusion. But the fortress also separates us from the living world. We become defenders of a doctrine rather than explorers of truth. The practice of meditation is the act of willingly stepping outside the fortress walls into the vulnerable, open field of direct experience. It is where the concept of impermanence is no longer a philosophical idea defending you, but the actual, bittersweet, moment-to-moment flow of life that you feel in your aging body, in the ending of a pleasant moment, in the changing light. Learning builds the sturdy boat. Practice is the act of launching it into the river. Now, let's look at the hazards of the practice-only path through another tale. Lena was a yoga teacher who came to meditation as an extension of her physical practice. She valued feeling over thinking. She developed a deep, intuitive connection to her body and breath, and could access states of serene stillness. She dismissed scriptures and talks as head stuff. However, when she faced a series of personal losses, a breakup, the illness of a parent, her serene stillness shattered. The profound grief felt like a failure of her practice. She had no framework to understand suffering as a universal truth, not a personal flaw. She had no teachings on compassion, karu, that could hold her own pain. Her practice, which had been anchored in feeling good and calm, offered no resources for feeling broken. She felt spiritually bankrupt. Her bottom-up process was flooded with raw pain, and she had no top-down structure of wisdom to help channel and understand that flood. She needed the learning to tell her she wasn't failing, she was meeting the very raw material the path is designed to transform. The historical discourse we touched on reveals the social cost of this divide. When the community of practitioners splits into scholars and meditators, each camp starts to speak a different language. The scholars speak the language of concepts and texts, the meditators speak the language of experience and silence. They cease to understand each other. The Venerable Maha Chunda's admonishment is a plea for a common language, a language where experience illuminates the text, and the text gives voice to experience. A healthy spiritual community, a true Sangha, is a living translation service. It contains those who can explain the subtle points of anatta and those who can sit with you in the fearful silence when you first glimpse it. One validates the other. So, the practical integration is a gentle, cyclical practice. It begins with intentional exposure. Choose one teaching to live with for a week. Not a book, a teaching. All that is subject to arising is subject to ceasing. That's it. Carry it as you go about your day. When frustration arises in traffic, remember the teaching, this feeling has arisen. It will cease. This is learning applied in real time. Then, in your formal meditation, let that teaching go. Don't think about it. Just sit. Be with whatever arises and ceases. After the sit, reflect. How did the teaching manifest? You might see that the breath itself arises and ceases. The connection is made not theoretically, but in the laboratory of your awareness. The learning directs the gaze, the practice provides the sight. If this method of cyclical, integrative practice makes sense to you, a supportive community can be vital. Sharing insights and struggles with others on a similar path helps ground both learning and practice, preventing the arrogance of the former and the isolation of the latter. Let's contemplate a metaphor from nature. A tree, to live and thrive, requires both a deep, unseen root system and a vast, reaching canopy. The roots delve into the dark earth, drawing up water and nutrients, steady, silent, foundational work. The canopy spreads towards the sun, engaging in the dynamic process of photosynthesis, interacting with light, air, and sky. If a tree invested only in roots, it would be a buried secret, never realizing its potential for height, fruit, or shade. If it invested only in canopy, it would be a precarious, soon-to-wither spectacle, with no anchor or sustenance. In the path of the Buddha, meditation is the root system. It is the silent, grounding work of turning inward, of cultivating stability and drawing nourishment from the depths of your own presence. Learning the Dharma is the canopy. It is the expansive engagement with wisdom, with the light of understanding, transforming raw experience into the energy of insight. One cannot exist in wholeness without the other. The roots give the tree resilience, the canopy gives it purpose and growth. Our practice must be equally balanced in the dark, quiet work of the root and the luminous, expansive work of the leaf. Now, let's explore this through an original story. Clara was a master gardener renowned for her ability to revive dying plants. Her secret was not just in the watering or the feeding, but in her deep study of soil science, the pH levels, micronutrient content, and bacterial ecosystems. She learned, canopy, that a plant's distress is often a message about an unseen root environment. Yet, her true genius was in her practice. She would sit quietly with a struggling plant, not just testing the soil, but observing the slant of its leaves, the subtle hue of its stems, feeling the moisture and texture of the earth with her own hands, roots. She synthesized data with direct sensation. One day, a prized orchid was failing. All her soil tests were perfect. Puzzled, she simply sat with it during the different hours of the day. She learned through patient observation, practice, that a reflected glare from a nearby window was scorching its leaves at a specific afternoon angle, a problem no soil test could reveal. Her knowledge guided her investigation, but her devoted, present practice discovered the true cause. In your own life, your learning provides the soil science, the understanding of mental factors, the causes of stress. Your meditation is the patient, present sitting with your own inner ecosystem, noticing what a thought, an emotion, or a sensation truly needs, which may not be what the textbook first suggests. This leads us to a profound disadvantage of an over-reliance on practice without the canopy of learning, the cultivation of spiritual bypassing. This is a modern term for an ancient trap. It is the use of spiritual practices, like meditation, to avoid, suppress, or prematurely transcend difficult psychological or emotional issues. One uses the calm of the root system to hide from the storms in the canopy. For instance, a person might use concentration to detach from feelings of anger or grief, labeling them as just not peaceful or illusion, rather than using the wisdom teachings to understand their conditioned, impermanent nature and work with them compassionately. The practice becomes a way to stay in the dark, comfortable earth and never grow into the challenging, illuminating light. Learning provides the crucial wisdom that true peace isn't about avoiding the storm, but about understanding the nature of weather itself. The canopy teachings on compassion, metta, karu, specifically instruct us to include our own difficult states in the field of care, not to exile them through sheer focus. Let's examine the opposite through another anecdote. Professor Evans was a respected academic in religious studies. He could lecture for hours on the doctrinal differences between Theravada and Mahayana, on the intricacies of sunyata, emptiness. His learning was vast. Students found him brilliant but distant. In his personal life, he was riddled with anxiety about his standing, his next publication, his legacy. He knew the Buddha's teachings on non-self, anatta, intellectually better than almost anyone, yet he suffered acutely from a fortified, anxious sense of self. His canopy was expansive, but his roots were shallow and brittle. During a sabbatical, he attended a silent meditation retreat, forced to stop lecturing and simply sit with the raw data of his anxiety. Without his books to hide behind, he was terrified. But in that practiced silence, root work, the teaching of anatta ceased to be a doctrine. He felt, directly, the frantic, impersonal swirl of thoughts and fears that constructed Professor Evans. The learning provided the concept, the practice provided the devastating, liberating proof. His subsequent lectures were not just brilliant, they were alive, compassionate, and grounded. The roots had finally grown to support the canopy. The Buddha's own framework for this is the threefold training: sila, samadhi, panna, morality, concentration, wisdom. This is the sequential, integrated blueprint. Sila, ethical conduct, is the first practice, the preparation of the soil, the clearing of weeds that would choke growth. It creates the conditions of non-remorse and social harmony that allow the mind to settle. Samadhi, concentration, is the deep root growth. The practice of unifying the mind, making it steady, resilient, and capable of profound absorption. Panna, wisdom, is the flourishing canopy, the insightful understanding that arises when this concentrated mind investigates reality. It's vital to see the order and interdependence. You cannot force a canopy of wisdom without the supportive roots of concentration. You cannot develop deep, stable roots in toxic, untended soil of harmful actions. And the wisdom that blooms then nourishes and deepens your morality and refines your concentration. It is an upward spiral of integration, not a collection of separate subjects. Consider a modern, psychological parallel: exposure therapy. To heal a phobia, a person must first learn, canopy, about the safety of the situation, understand the mechanism of their anxiety. This is the cognitive, top-down piece. But that alone rarely cures. They must then gradually, gently practice roots. Exposure to the feared stimulus in a controlled way, experiencing the bodily sensations without fleeing. This is the bottom-up, experiential piece. The learning creates a framework of safety, the practice rewires the nervous system. The integration of both leads to healing. In Buddhism, we are doing exposure therapy to the root causes of all suffering: our clinging, our aversion, our delusion. We learn about their nature, and then we practice sitting with their manifestations in our mind and body, without following or fleeing, until we see their empty, impermanent nature. Learning without the exposure practice leaves the phobia intact. Practice without the learning framework can be re-traumatizing. So, how do we plant these seeds in daily life? It begins with the alternating current. Don't try to do both at once in a single session. Alternate your focus. One day, or part of your day, be a canopy day. Read a passage. Listen to a talk. Ponder a single teaching. Write a reflection on what right effort might mean in your current life situation. Then, let it go. The next time you meditate, make it a pure root day. No agenda to understand anything. Just sit. Feel the breath. Notice sensations. Be the silent, receiving earth. Trust that the nutrients from your canopy day are being drawn up naturally. This alternating current prevents the burnout of trying to be intellectually brilliant while meditating, and the stagnation of practicing in a conceptual vacuum. The integration happens in the background, in the wisdom of your own being, not in your foreground thinking. Imagine you are a cartographer in an age of discovery, tasked with mapping an unknown continent, the continent of your own inner world. You have two primary tools. The first is a collection of ancient, masterfully drawn charts from explorers who came before, detailing coastlines, mountain ranges, and notations about where dragons were said to dwell. These charts are the accumulated learning of the Buddha's teachings. They are invaluable, saving you from the folly of thinking you are the first to set foot here. But the second tool is your own sextant, compass, and journal. This is your practice of meditation. It is how you take your own bearings, note your personal landmarks, and feel the true wind on your face. If you only stare at the ancient charts, you will never know the scent of this land's pine forests or the taste of its wild berries. You are a scholar of a place you've never visited. If you throw the charts away and trust only your own crude instruments, you may mistake a large lake for an ocean, a hill for a mountain, and you may walk directly into the territory of those dragons, unprepared. The journey to inner freedom requires both reverence for the maps drawn by the enlightened ones, and the courageous, first-hand expedition of your own direct experience. This brings us to a critical psychological and Buddhist intersection, the knowing-doing gap. Modern psychology identifies this as the space between intellectual understanding and behavioral change. We all know eating well is healthy, yet we might not do it. We know patience is virtuous, yet we snap. In Buddhism, this gap is the very field where suffering persists. We can learn that craving is the cause of suffering, yet we still crave. The practice of meditation is the technology for bridging this gap. It is the deliberate, repetitive training that rewires the neural pathways, turning the knowing that craving arises into the capacity to pause within the craving itself. Learning identifies the gap, practice builds the bridge across it, plank by mindful plank. Let's see this gap through an original story. Michael was a conflict resolution consultant. He taught Fortune 500 companies the principles of nonviolent communication, active listening, and de-escalation. His learning was expert. Yet, at home, his teenage daughter's dismissive attitude would trigger in him a torrent of anger and lecturing. He knew everything about resolving conflict, but in the heat of that emotional trigger, the knowing evaporated. The gap was vast. On advice, he began a very simple practice. When he felt the heat of anger rise, his only task was to excuse himself, go to another room, and for 90 seconds, feel the physical sensations of the emotion, the pounding heart, the clenched jaw. Without acting or speaking. This was not analysis, it was pure, bottom-up practice. This tiny bridge of pause, built by meditation in microform, slowly allowed his vast knowledge of conflict resolution to actually flow into the situation. The practice didn't teach him what to do, it stopped him from doing what he already knew was unskillful, long enough for his learning to become action. This illustrates the peril of leaving learning unbridged, the library of unread wisdom. We can amass a grand library of Buddhist wisdom, but if we never open the books in the moments that matter, in traffic, in argument, in loss, they are merely decorative. The practice of mindfulness is the act of opening the right book at the right time. It creates the mental space, the pause, where a teaching like, "Hatred never ceases by hatred," can actually be recalled and applied. Without the practiced pause, the library might as well be locked. Now, let's journey to the other side of the imbalance with another tale. Sophia was a dedicated Vipassana meditator. She attended long retreats and valued the technique above all else. She developed remarkable equanimity towards physical pain and passing thoughts. However, she struggled with ethical dilemmas in her work as a nurse. Faced with complex patient-family disputes, her meditative equanimity sometimes felt like indifference. She had no ethical framework, sila. From the teachings to guide her actions, her practice was solely about observing internal phenomena. Was her calm witnessing an expression of wisdom, or a withdrawal of compassionate engagement? She lacked the learning, the Buddhist precepts and teachings on right speech and right action, to channel her cultivated calm into wise, compassionate conduct. Her practice was a powerful engine, but without the steering wheel of ethical wisdom, it wasn't going anywhere beneficial. She needed the canopy of learning to give direction to the powerful root system she had grown. The historical tension the Buddha addressed speaks to this need for a complete vehicle. The monks who were only learned were like people who spend their lives studying the engineering schematics of a car, the combustion cycle, the transmission system, but never learned to drive. The monks who only meditated were like people who sit in the driver's seat, fond of the feeling of the wheel and the seat, but with no knowledge of the rules of the road or how to navigate to a destination. Both are incomplete. The Buddha's path is the complete vehicle. The learning provides the map, the mechanical knowledge, and the traffic laws, ethics. The practice is the actual driving, the felt experience of acceleration, braking, and steering on the road of life. To reach the destination of liberation, nibbana, you need it all. So, how do we build this complete vehicle in a practical, daily way? It starts with the two-step pause. This is a micro-practice of integration for moments of difficulty. Step 1, the practice route. When a strong emotion or reactive thought arises, your first duty is to drop into the body. Feel. Don't name it, don't analyze it. Just locate the sensation. Is it pressure in the chest? Heat in the face? This is pure meditation, the root system drawing up the raw data. Step 2, the learning canopy. After you have grounded in the sensation for a few breaths, you can then gently invite in the learning. Ask, what does the Dharma say about this? Not to analyze the feeling away, but to hold it in a wiser context. You might remember, this is a form of dukkha, or this feeling is not self. This isn't thinking about the feeling, it's framing it with wisdom. This two-step process ensures practice is not bypassed by intellect, and learning is not left as theory. It becomes a single, integrated motion of healing. Let me share a final original anecdote for this part. A young filmmaker, Eli, was struggling to edit a documentary. He had hours of powerful, emotional footage, raw experience/practice, but no narrative thread. It was an overwhelming, sensorial soup. He then stepped back and studied story structure, learning the classic arcs of challenge, struggle, and resolution. This learning acted like a trellis. He didn't force the footage to fit the structure rigidly. Instead, the structure gave him a way to look at his raw material with new eyes. He began to see the inherent narrative that was already there, hidden in the chaos. The raw footage was his direct experience, the story structure was the Dharma. The edit, the painstaking selection and sequencing, was his integrated practice, where feeling and understanding finally came together to create a coherent, impactful whole. Your life is that raw footage. The Dharma provides the timeless narrative structures of cause and effect, suffering and release. Your mindful, ethical living is the edit. Let's consider a master sculptor, one who works with marble. She possesses two fundamental kinds of knowledge. First, she has studied the history of sculpture, the properties of different stones, the physics of tension and balance. She understands which tools create which effects. This is her learning. Second, she has spent countless hours with hammer and chisel in hand, her muscles learning the weight of the tools, her fingers sensing the subtle grain and fissures in the stone, her eye judging depth and shadow by feel more than measure. This is her practice. If she only possesses the first, she is an art historian, capable of brilliant critique but unable to create a single form. If she only possesses the second, she is a skilled laborer, perhaps able to make smooth shapes but lacking the vision to express something transcendent. True artistry, the ability to liberate a form trapped within the stone, demands that her scholarly understanding flows without interruption through her practiced hands. In the path of the Buddha, you are both the sculptor and the marble. The Dharma is your study of form and tool. Meditation is the daily, tactile practice of chiseling away the excess, the attachments, aversions, and ignorance, to reveal the peace and wisdom inherent within. This process highlights a key Buddhist principle, yoniso manasikara, appropriate or wise attention. This is not just attention, but attention directed by wisdom. Learning provides the wisdom that tells you where to direct your attention, not to the pleasing surface of a sensory desire, but to its impermanent, unsatisfactory nature. Practice is the ability to actually place and sustain your attention there. Without the wisdom, your attention is rudderless, blown by every wind of thought and feeling. Without the practice, your wisdom is a theory about steering, while you remain adrift. Appropriate attention is the moment the sculptor's knowledge of anatomy directs her chisel to just the right spot, with just the right pressure. Now, let's see an imbalance play out in an original story. Daniel was a hospice nurse, a deeply empathetic man who felt the suffering of others acutely. To cope, he threw himself into studying Buddhist philosophy, particularly the teachings on emptiness and non-self. He used these profound concepts as a shield. When a patient's pain or a family's grief overwhelmed him, he would mentally retreat into thoughts like, "It's all empty. There's no solid self to feel this pain." This was learning used not as a tool for deeper engagement, but as an escape hatch from the raw, human experience of compassion. His attention, guided by a misapplication of wisdom, moved away from the felt reality. He was using the canopy to hide from the rain, not to understand the ecosystem that needs it. He lacked the complementary practice of Brahmavihara, the sublime abidings, specifically karu, compassion, which is a practice of opening the heart to suffering, not conceptually explaining it away. His learning was real, but without the balancing practice of heart-opening meditation, it became a subtle form of coldness, a spiritual bypass dressed in profound philosophy. This leads us to a danger of intellectual learning, the freeze-dried Dharma. When teachings are consumed without the water of direct experience, they become freeze-dried, light, portable, but devoid of nourishing life. You can carry a lot of it, but it won't feed you until you add the warm water of your own practiced attention. The teaching of all phenomena are not self is a freeze-dried concept. The practice of watching a burning anger arise, rage, and dissolve without claiming it as, my anger is the warm water that reconstitutes it into a nourishing, lived truth. Let's turn the lens to the practice-heavy side with another tale. Priya was an avid marathon runner who applied the same disciplined, goal-oriented mindset to meditation. She tracked her sits, prized long durations of unwavering focus, and viewed distracting thoughts as enemies to be defeated. Her concentration was impressive. However, when she wasn't performing well on the cushion, she felt like a spiritual failure. She had no learning about the Buddha's teachings on the middle way. Avoiding both the indulgence of distraction and the aggression of forceful suppression. She didn't understand the role of gentle, investigative curiosity, vipassana. Her practice was all effort and no wisdom, akin to a sculptor who only knows how to strike the marble with great force, likely to shatter the masterpiece within. She needed the learning to introduce the concepts of mudita, sympathetic joy, towards her own efforts, and upekkha, equanimity, towards results. This wisdom would have transformed her aggressive effort into resilient, balanced cultivation. The Buddha's metaphor of the lute string is perfectly tuned for this. A lute string must be tuned to a precise tension, not too tight, not too loose. The scholar's mind, stretched tight with concepts and views, produces a sharp, brittle sound of argument. The meditator's mind, left too loose without the guiding tension of wisdom, produces a slack, dull sound of vagueness. The sweet spot of liberation is found in the balanced tension between learned understanding and practiced experience. One corrects the excess of the other. So, what is a practical method for finding this tune in daily life? Introduce the theme and the field. Select a simple theme from the teachings for a week or a month, for example, gratitude, or patience. This is your learning focus. Read a short teaching on it. Then, let that theme become the background intention for your meditation and daily mindfulness. In your meditation, the field, don't think about the theme. Just sit. But as you go about your day, let the theme color your awareness. When impatience arises while waiting in line, the field of your practiced awareness notices the irritation, and the theme of patience gently arises from your learning, not as a command, but as a friend whispering, "Ah, this is where patience is cultivated." The field is cultivated by practice, the seed is provided by learning. They grow together organically. Imagine you are learning a new language, the language of inner peace. There are two essential components. First, you must study the vocabulary, grammar, and syntax, the rules that govern how words combine to create meaning. This is the learning of Buddhism, the terms like dukkha, anatta, sati, the grammatical structures of the Four Noble Truths. The syntax of cause and effect in dependent origination. Without this study, any attempt to speak the language of peace will be limited to gestures and simple sounds, unable to express or comprehend complex truths. The second component is immersion. You must go to a place where the language is spoken, listen to native speakers, and struggle to form your own sentences, making mistakes, feeling confused, and gradually developing an ear and a voice. This is the practice of meditation and mindful living. It is the immersion in the direct experience of your own mind. If you only study the dictionary, you will never feel the language in your heart. If you only immerse yourself without any study, your understanding will remain primitive, stuck in basic phrases, unable to grasp deeper conversations about the nature of existence itself. Fluency, the ability to think, understand, and express yourself freely in the language of liberation, requires both dedicated study and courageous immersion. This brings us to a vital psychological and Buddhist intersection, the window of tolerance. In modern therapy, this is the optimal zone of arousal where a person can process emotions without becoming overwhelmed, hyperaroused, or shutting down, hypoaroused. Learning Buddhism, when done wisely, expands your window of tolerance from the top down. It gives you a cognitive framework that normalizes suffering and provides a hopeful path, making difficult emotions less terrifying and more understandable. This prevents hypoarousal, the numbing or avoidance of feeling. Meditation expands your window from the bottom up. It increases your capacity to stay present with intense physical sensations and emotions without reacting, preventing hyperarousal, the panic or rage that leads to being overwhelmed. The balanced practitioner uses learning to create a container of meaning and uses practice to strengthen their ability to stay within that container, even when the emotional temperature rises. One widens the window, the other deepens your ability to sit comfortably within it. Let's see an imbalance through an original story. Ben was a therapist who specialized in cognitive behavioral techniques. He was brilliant at helping clients identify and reframe distorted thoughts. In his personal study of Buddhism, he gravitated heavily toward the analytical Abhidharma, the detailed breakdown of mind states. His learning was deep and structurally sound. However, he had little personal meditation practice. When he experienced a period of profound sadness, his immediate response was to analyze it. This is a manifestation of the Dhammanasa, unpleasant mental feeling, aggregate. It is conditioned by such and such. He could map his sadness with clinical precision, but he couldn't be with it. He was all window frame, with a terrified aversion to actually looking out at the raw landscape of his own feeling. His learning, without the grounding practice of compassionate presence, became a new form of avoidance, a hyper-intellectual hypoarousal. He needed the immersion practice of Vedananupassana, contemplation of feelings, to simply feel the sadness as a bodily experience, to let the wisdom of his learning soften from a clinical analysis into a gentle, allowing awareness. This illustrates a pitfall of over-reliance on learning, the bypass of analysis. The mind, in its cleverness, can use sophisticated Dharma concepts to create a safe, observational distance from lived experience. It's a spiritualized form of dissociation. The practice of bare attention, sati, is the antidote, pulling you back from the analytical commentary and into the warm, sometimes uncomfortable, reality of the felt sense. Now, let's examine the opposite through another tale. Chloe was an artist who lived from intuition. She began meditating to find inspiration and fell in love with the open, non-conceptual space it provided. She sat for hours, enjoying the dissolution of boundaries between self and world. She dismissed all Dharma study as left-brain interference with her creative flow. Over time, however, her life became ungrounded. Her relationships suffered because she viewed others' emotional needs as drama, pulling her from her peaceful center. Her art became increasingly abstract and detached. She was floating in a vast, peaceful sky, practice, but had lost sight of the earth, the world of form, relationship, and ethical conduct described by the teachings. Her window of tolerance for peace was wide, but her tolerance for the messiness of human connection had narrowed. She lacked the learning of sila, ethics, and the wisdom of interconnectedness, pika samappada, to tether her expansive experience to compassionate, responsible living. Her immersion was deep, but in a language she only half understood, missing the vocabulary for relationship and care. The Buddha's own description of the path as ehipassiko, come and see, encapsulates the balance. Come is the invitation to practice, to immerse yourself. And see implies the resultant wisdom, the understanding that arises from that immersion. The invitation isn't, come and believe, or come and think. It is an invitation to a direct experiment, the results of which are verifiable, pikata veditabo vinuhi. The learning provides the hypothesis and the methodology. The practice is the experiment itself. You cannot have valid results without a sound method, and a method is useless if never tested in the lab of your own life. So, how do we design this personal experiment? We employ the notebook method. Keep 2 notebooks, physical or mental. The first is your learning log. Here, you jot down a key teaching that strikes you. Not a summary, just a phrase, e.g., nothing is worth clinging to. The second is your practice journal. Here, after meditation or at day's end, you write a brief, non-analytical note on direct experience, felt anxiety like a tight belt during the meeting. Noted it as, tightening, tightening. It faded. The integration happens not by forcing a link, but by reviewing them periodically. You'll start to see how the teachings in your learning log are illustrated by the raw data in your practice journal. The abstract teaching, nothing is worth clinging to, becomes illuminated by the specific entry, felt craving for praise after presentation. Noted the pleasant flutter, then the empty drop when it ended. Didn't cling. The learning gives meaning to the experience validates the learning. They become 2 halves of a conversation, recorded for your wisdom to overhear. Consider the human body's own wisdom. For optimal health, it requires 2 interconnected systems, the nervous system and the circulatory system. The nervous system is fast, electrical, delivering precise signals for immediate action and perception, a touch, a thought, a reflex. The circulatory system is slower, rhythmic, delivering oxygen and nutrients to every cell, removing waste, providing the fundamental sustenance for life. Now, imagine spiritual development. Learning Buddhism is akin to the nervous system. It delivers precise signals of understanding, the lightning-fast, aha, moments that clarify confusion and point the way. It's the discernment that recognizes a thought pattern as unskillful, the insight that connects cause and effect in your behavior. Meditation is the circulatory system. It is the slower, rhythmic, pervasive practice of mindfulness and compassion that nourishes the entirety of your being, that bathes every cell of your experience in awareness, that removes the metabolic waste of old grudges and fears. If you only have the fast signals of learning without the deep nourishment of practice, you are a being of brilliant but brittle sparks, lacking warmth and vitality, all insight, no embodiment. If you only have the slow circulation of practice without the clarifying signals of learning, you are like a well-nourished but unresponsive body, full of vitality but lacking conscious direction, all presence, no discernment. Wholeness requires the electrical clarity of wisdom to be carried on the steady pulse of embodied awareness. This framework reveals a critical point of integration, embodied cognition. Modern science tells us that our thoughts, emotions, and even our highest abstract reasoning are deeply rooted in the physical sensations and systems of the body. A concept isn't just an abstract idea, it has a somatic fingerprint. The Buddhist practice of mindfulness of the body, Kayanapasana, is the ultimate technology for exploring this. Learning provides the concepts, for example, clinging creates suffering. But it is through the meditation practice of scanning the body that you discover the physical signature of clinging, perhaps a gripping in the gut when you fear losing something, a tension in the shoulders when you insist on being right. The learning illuminates the pattern, the practice locates its living, breathing address within you. Integration is the process of allowing the intellectual understanding to descend from the head and take up residence in the felt experience of the body, where true transformation occurs. Let's observe an imbalance of all nervous system through an original story. David was a debate champion who turned his skills to Buddhist philosophy. He excelled in online forums, deftly deconstructing others' views with references to sutras and logical syllogisms. He could signal intellectual superiority with speed and precision. But he lived in a state of chronic, low-grade agitation. His mind was a constant hum of argument and counter-argument, even in solitude. His nervous system was overstimulated, firing constantly. He had no practice to engage his circulatory system, no way to soothe this agitation, to nourish a baseline of calm. He knew the Buddha taught the cessation of suffering, but he could only talk about cessation, not inhabit it. His learning was a series of perfectly delivered electrical impulses that illuminated nothing but his own internal storm. He lacked the meditative rhythm that would have carried those insights into a deeper, calming integration. The wisdom remained synaptic, never becoming cellular. This is a key pitfall of isolated learning, the hyperarticulate prison. You become so fluent in the language of liberation that you can describe the bars of your cell, the lock's mechanism, and the landscape of freedom beyond with poetic accuracy, yet you never learn the simple, quiet practice of turning the key. The discourse becomes a substitute for the experience, and the ego happily becomes the warden of this intellectually sophisticated prison. Now, let's look at the all-circulatory system imbalance with another tale. Maria found solace in long, repetitive runs and in sitting quietly in nature. She called this her meditation. She felt a deep, wordless connection to life, a cyclical sense of peace and renewal. However, when confronted with ethical complexity, like whether to confront a dishonest friend or how to manage inherited wealth, she felt lost. Her deep, nourishing practice provided no specific signals for action. Her circulatory system was robust, but her nervous system lacked the learned ethical pathways to send clear directives. She had equanimity but not discernment. She needed the learning of the 5 precepts and the nuances of right speech and right action to provide the ethical wiring. This would have allowed her deep, nourishing calm to express itself not as passive neutrality, but as wise, compassionate, and sometimes courageous action. Her practice was the nourishing blood, but she needed the learning to form the nerves that direct that nourishment purposefully. The Buddha's teaching on the 2 wings of a bird is the classic metaphor for this. A bird needs both a left wing and a right wing to fly. One wing is wisdom, panna, born of learning and discernment. The other wing is concentration, samadhi, born of practiced unification of mind. With only one wing, the bird hops and spins in circles on the ground. With both wings working in harmony, it soars into the sky of liberation. The learning wing gives direction, the practice wing provides the lift. They are different in function, but identical in their necessity for the single purpose of flight. So, how do we cultivate both wings in practical, daily life? We engage in paired practice. This is a simple, 2-part daily ritual. Part 1, the wisdom wing, learning. In the morning, or at the start of your practice period, spend just 2 to 3 minutes with a single, potent phrase from the Buddha. For example, abandon what is unskillful. Don't analyze it. Just set the intention, today, I will be curious about what is unskillful. This primes the nervous system for discernment. Part 2, the concentration wing, practice then, move immediately into your meditation. Let go of the phrase. Your only job is to collect the mind, to cultivate the lift of focused, gentle attention on the breath or body. When unskillful states like agitation or dullness arise, you don't need to think, "This is unskillful." Your morning intention has already sensitized you. You simply recognize them as the turbulence that hinders flight, and you gently return to the breath, which is the act of abandoning them in that moment. The learning sets the compass, the practice is the journey. They are paired, sequential, and mutually supportive. As our exploration draws to a close, let us envision a final, unifying metaphor. Picture a lantern on a dark, winding path. The oil within the lamp, steady and sustaining, is your personal practice of meditation, the quiet cultivation of focus, calm, and mindful presence. This oil is your inner resource, the fuel you have carefully developed through patience and consistency. The flame, however, is the light of wisdom, kindled by your learning of the Buddha's teachings. It is this flame that cuts through the darkness, that reveals the path's turns, the stones that might trip you, and the true direction forward. Without the oil, the flame has nothing to feed upon, it sputters and dies, leaving you with brilliant ideas that cannot illuminate a single step. Without the flame, the oil sits in darkness, a potential that remains unseen and unused, unable to dispel confusion or fear. The complete lantern, the integrated spiritual life, requires both, the sustained fuel of practiced awareness and the illuminating spark of discerning wisdom. One maintains the other. Your daily practice replenishes the oil, your sincere study trims and brightens the flame. We have journeyed through stories of architects and chefs, gardeners and musicians, sculptors and cartographers. Each story illuminated the same timeless truth from a different angle: freedom is found in the marriage of understanding and experience. The Buddha did not offer a theory to be debated in isolation, nor a technique to be performed in a void. He offered a complete training, a curriculum for the heart and mind. To neglect one aspect of this training is to attempt a journey with a map but no legs, or with strong legs but no map. Both are futile. Therefore, let your approach be one of gentle, curious integration. Do not force yourself to be a scholar one day and an ascetic the next. Instead, allow a natural rhythm to emerge. Let a line from a teaching resonate in your mind, then sit in silence and see how your lived experience echoes or challenges it. When you encounter a stubborn difficulty in meditation, seek out the wisdom that speaks to it. Become the bridge between the world of words and the world of direct knowing. This path is not about adding more to your life, but about integrating what is already there. Your thoughts, your emotions, your daily interactions, these are the raw material. The learning of the Dharma provides the blueprint for transformation. The practice of meditation is the skilled hands that do the work. Trust this process. Start exactly where you are, with the understanding you have and the 5 minutes of silence you can spare. The balance is not a distant achievement, but a moment-to-moment intention to see clearly and to be fully present with what is seen. From all of us here at Monk's Temple, we thank you for sharing this time and this contemplation. May the lantern of your practice always be full, and the flame of your wisdom burn bright. May you walk your path with both courage and clarity, and may you find, in the integration of learning and practice, an unshakable peace. Good night.